Bitcoin and stocks continue to crash as gold and silver continue to, basically rally, right? And this is basically coming off the back of a very chaotic weekend. Obviously, we have the whole stuff going on in Mexico. I've never been just an advocate for any sort of violence. I hope that, cooler heads are going to prevail, and I don't think that violence is ever the answer. That being said, I understand why everything is going on. Unfortunately, it looks like we have the tensions between Iran and the United States also heating up. I do wonder if all this is just kind of theatrical, because it's not like the country is just necessarily going to start threatening all this kind of stuff. Hey guys, just so you know, we're about to attack you. I don't think that that's actually what's going on. So I do hope that, nothing actually comes of that. And I hope that we come to some sort of agreement or peace treaty, because nobody really wants all this kind of violence and war going on, right? Understandably so, it's crashing the markets. We have just peak uncertainty when it comes to just the whole economy in general. Bad data reports across the board, really bearish outlooks whenever it comes to just the overall United States. So everything is just looking very, very bad in my opinion. Now, obviously, Bitcoin is very sensitive to liquidity, which could be looked at as a good and bad thing. Now, obviously, if you're somebody that is fully exposed or leveraged into the markets, this is not a good thing. Same goes with stocks. Those of you that take on margin, this is why I always say, never invest more than you afford to lose, and don't take out loans to basically take on risk, right? Because things can turn around, or they can just last very, very long, right? Because, obviously there's this popular saying where the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. And I think that we've been seeing this because, everything's been very, very rocky, and especially with crypto for the last, 4 to 5 months. Basically, they've been going sideways on Bitcoin for the last couple months, but then obviously we've been in a macro downtrend. Now, obviously, this is the worst time for people to have any sort of positive sentiment in the market. This is very, very similar to how the FTX collapse was, the Luna collapse. So, that does signal some sort of short-term bottom where we're going to reverse and put in some sort of counter trend rally. Just because the market makers who basically manipulate the price, you guys can guess who that is, they need participants in the market. We can't just have straight going down. And obviously we can continue to go lower from here, right? But it would make a lot of sense to kind of entice traders back into the market to create new liquidity. Same goes for stocks and all that kind of stuff, but that kind of happens more on a macro scale because it's harder to move the needle on the price action of equities, stocks, all that kind of stuff. And obviously with war tensions, that's why we see precious metals continuing to rally. So again, I think that the positive kind of aspect of this is, if you're in crypto, we're down significantly. And it's kind of it's attractive buying zones in my opinion. I continue to dollar cost average, and I kind of take the counter trend sort of narratives, right? So whenever people are very, very max fear, everybody's calling Bitcoin a scam again. Everyone's saying it's going to go to zero. That all makes me pretty bullish, at least for some sort of counter trend, right? Now, I don't know if we're going to continue just to go up from here after any sort of reversal. My base case is we're basically going to trade sideways and down until basically Q4 of this year. That would just pretty much put us in line with every single other 4-year cycle. And I don't think that it's necessarily that different, because basically when it comes to crypto in these 4-year cycles, in my opinion, this kind of navigates around the whole political kind of schedule, right? So you have these 4-year elections with the United States that kind of lines up with the business cycle. And so it's all just narrative driven. Basically everything is controlled, right? We all know that the markets are manipulated, and they need narratives to kind of spin whatever's going on, right? I think that that's very, very, blatant at this point. So I think that we can't really afford to have the dollar continue to collapse. I think that we need to continue being the world reserve currency, which is the US dollar. And so I do think that there's just a lot of noise going on. There's a lot of speculation politically going on with just, you name it, right? We have the Epstein files that are just going everywhere. We have aliens now that are kind of being reported. We have all these kind of war tensions, and there's just no shortage of just peak uncertainty. And that's one thing that the markets hate the most whenever it comes to, digesting what's going on and how people want to allocate. And again, why precious metals continue to rally. Would I be buying precious metals at this price? No. Do I think that they're going to go higher? Probably, but it's risk to reward, right? And you can always just look back at all these macro crashes, right? COVID, I think we can all agree was kind of a scam. I'm not saying that lightly, right? But when you look at basically how the wealth transfer kind of transpired, that was one of the biggest wealth transfers that we've seen in a long, long time. Every single market crash or every sort of disaster, unfortunately, is very, very profitable for the elite and the rich people, right? Basically they crash everything. they buy up the assets really, really cheap, and then they just run it back, print money, and they get richer and richer, right? And a lot of people don't really think this deep into it. They kind of get caught up into like the emotional aspect of it. And that's why my comments have been super, super negative lately. It's all just like, oh, you know, when I was calling for like a stock market correction and Bitcoin correction, everyone was saying like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. That's never going to happen, yada, yada, yada. And my point isn't to always just like, you know, give you guys something to just like doom and gloom over, right? My goal here is to be realistic and help you guys make money, because majority of traders and investors, something like 80% plus, they don't make any money. And you realize that those are probably the people with fake profiles that are just very, very emotional in the comment section, just mad because the price isn't doing what they want. Or maybe they don't have like a long time horizon when it comes to all this. And so they're kind of doing counterintuitive things, right? So, you know, that's no like personal dig on anybody, right? That's just like market psychology, and you have to have thick skin whenever you're investing. And it is naturally emotional, right? Because you're putting your hard-earned cash or your savings into these assets. And so my whole thing is, I do think that cooler heads are going to prevail. I think eventually the assets are going to go up because they have to print money to basically grow us out of any sort of deflationary stuff with artificial intelligence, any sort of like war funding. They need to basically prop up the economy and print money to kind of fund this. Obviously with all this like tariff stuff going on, I don't really know what's going to happen with that. I think that that's just like a huge mess. And I just don't really like getting caught up in like political stuff, right? Because it's all just like, you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. Like people can say whatever they want, politicians specifically, but my whole goal is just to make enough money to where none of that actually matters. You know, if something actually happens where, you know, you need to vacate or do any of that kind of stuff, my position has been like, you need to have the kind of resources and power to be able to do that for your loved ones, right? So again, I'm gonna go work out. I'm sick of this price action. You know, like I said, I'm continuing to dollar cost average. The lower the prices go, the more excited I get. That's the kind of mindset that I would implore you guys to kind of adopt, because people tend to get rich in the bear markets, right? When everything is down, when everything is really, really painful to buy, whenever it's, you know, very, very hard and it's like gut wrenching, you're like, I don't want to buy right now because like I'm sure it's going to go down. Those are usually in hindsight always really good buying opportunities. And then vice versa, I always get very, very nervous whenever we're like at all-time highs and everybody's super euphoric, because usually what happens is going against the herd is what pays you out the most, right? When everyone is just of the general consensus that we're going in one particular direction, usually the market humbles you. So with that being said, don't get shaken out. I know it sucks, guys. Don't get overly emotional. If you've made mistakes, kind of take a step back, learn from them. If you've gotten washed out through like leverage or margin and that's kind of like been said and done, don't make any emotional decisions and just try to make it all back, right? Because that's usually never a good sign. There's always a chance to make things back in the future, right? And I think that a lot of good opportunities are ahead of us. So again, make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on your bell notifications, and I'll continue to update you guys with what I'm seeing. If you guys have any suggestions, drop them in the comment section, and I'll be making videos on that shortly. See you soon. Bye.